Hello, everyone. We have got an exciting author with us today, and we have Lawrence Blair. So, welcome, Lawrence, to our interview today.
Thank you.
So, I'm really excited to share this book with you because I don't know about the people listening, but I know that a lot of people now go to Bali. I know I'm there only in a couple of months' time, and there's so many expats over in Bali. But there's a lot about Bali that we don't know. It's not just about going and experiencing the great bintang there and things like that. It really has a history about it. And so most people know about Bali and certain parts of Indonesia, but I think the author of this book, Lawrence, is going to share with you some adventures and highlight so much exciting things. So the book is called Ring of Fire. And Lawrence is the author also of Rhythms of Vision. But what's so exciting is that this is also a film series. So you can actually not only grab the book and read about it, but you can actually go and find out more about this series that brings. I'll let Lawrence tell you a bit about this, but this is back in the days where we had those, I think it was the 3 millimeter, if I'm correct, type cameras. Is that right, Lawrence?
Well, it was 16 millimeter we shot on, which involved an awful lot of back stock to carry around with you. Yes.
Absolutely amazing. So, Ring of Fire is also available on iTunes and Vimeo. But let's get into this book, which is absolutely amazing. Look at this great read here, and some of the photos in here are just extraordinary. But what first drew you, Lawrence, and your brother Lorne to Indonesia? And how old were you at the time? And how did the idea of the Ring of Fire come about?
Well, we were brought up in England in dry little prep schools, and then fortunately, my parents emigrated to Mexico when I was 14 and my brother was 11. So the stories we'd been reading about adventure suddenly all came to life in this new country, which had ancient civilizations and amazing temples and jungles, tropical seas. So that completely blew our minds, and it helped expand our hearts, such that when we eventually came to Indonesia, we were receptive to the place. How did we first get here? We were involved, the whole family was, in a meditational group before it was a trendy thing to do, before the Beatles had become involved with the Maharishi Mahesh Yoga. And the meditational group's guru happened to be based in Java. So my first visit to Indonesia was as delegate to a spiritual event in Java. And that's where both my brother and I discovered, wow, this Indonesia is like Mexico multiplied by 100. So that's what fascinated us about Indonesia for a start. And then I was back in the UK. I was doing a doctoral degree on mysticism and altered states of consciousness and religious experiences, partly because I'd had some mind blowing experiences here in the ashram in Indonesia. And that's when my brother and I began reading about Alfred Russel Wallace, the great 19th century naturalist who had done this extraordinary series of 8 years of adventures here in Indonesia. We managed to raise a bit of money from Ringo Starr, Apple at the time, who produced our first film. So that's what we first came to shoot, the first of the films. And the book, well, I should say the first of what were really 9 separate expeditions, but which many years later, we couldn't sell it until many years later it was picked up by PBS, Public Broadcasting in Boston, by ABC Australia, and by the BBC. So it was a triple co-production by them. And then when it came out, it was an immense success because it was based on 10 years of our filming these 9 separate expeditions. So The Ring of Fire, an Indonesian Odyssey, this book, which I'm glad to say Dean Publishing has picked up and put out again, has actually been in print since it was the matching book of this internationally famous series and has been constantly selling for all these years since 1988. It had a hiatus when my last publisher went out of business, not because he wasn't managing to sell my book, but just because for a number of material reasons he couldn't do it anymore. And so it's lovely that not only is the series itself newly available, as you say, on iTunes and Vimeo, but that the matching book comes out also in a new modern edition.
I absolutely love that. And you were trendy before it became trendy, which all this meditation and just really understanding more beyond
Mm.
ourselves as human beings, which is amazing. And let me say that the endorsement on the front is from Sir Richard Branson. So some of those name drops that you did there, you've really met some incredible people. And as Sir Richard Branson says, this is real adventure. No radios, compasses, ice, emergency supplies for months at a time through one of the most hazardous and fascinating regions on Earth. So that was from Richard Branson, let alone all those other people that you've met. So that's incredible. And you documented some of Indonesia's most remote tribes and ancient traditions. I'm sure that a lot of these encounters impacted you. What would you say? I know they need to read the book to find out, and like I said, it's an adventure on its own in the book, but can you tell us one that might have stood out for you that was so impactful and why?
Well, quite a few were, but I should explain really, my doctoral degree was in a field, rather a rarefied field called psychoanthropology, which is the anthropology of the range of the human mind. And we were aware in the 70s and 80s that the tribal peoples of the world were vanishing fast. They were being dragged into the 21st century, and that they were the custodians of an ancient wisdom of how to live with the environment. And so we set out, my brother and I, initially as documentarians to try and find, track, trace down, and live with tribal peoples who ideally had not been contacted either by their governments or by missionary groups. And so by living with them, we could capture a record of their lives and of their beliefs. And so it did indeed lead us into remote and wild and wonderful regions where we were entirely vulnerable to our environment. There were only two of us most of the time, and therefore we were no threat to these tribal peoples. Had we been a larger group, we could have been more of a threat. But in this way, we were totally vulnerable to them. And indeed, we lived amongst the people who were cannibals at the time, who ate Michael Rockefeller, son of the vice president at the time in 1961. This story is all in the book. And we tracked and we sailed with the Bugis pirates, who were the seafaring, ferocious tribe who give the word boogeyman or bogeyman to the English language. That was amazing. And I suppose one of the peoples who made the greatest impression on me, to answer your question, were the Punan Dayaks of Borneo. Now, the Dayaks are the blanket term for some 200 different tribes on the massive island of Borneo. And all of them hunted heads except for one tribe, the Punans, who believed in a god of love, and they withdrew up the rivers, disappeared into the forest, and for hundreds of years became the free roving masters of the deep interior. And it was believed in the well, it was really the early 80s, perhaps the late 70s by then, that they no longer existed in their nomadic form. And academics hadn't seen them, their government hadn't seen them, and the only way to find out if they were still there was to go in and find out. And so we managed to raise a little money from passengers on a ship that we lectured on, my brother and I at the time, and we waved goodbye to them, and we took off for what turned out to be a 4-month journey into the heart of Borneo. And we went in finally, to make a long story short. The longer story is in Ring of Fire and Indonesian Odyssey. But to make it short, we found people who are Punans, but semi-acculturated Punans. They spoke a whole pile of languages. They'd lived on the edge of civilization, and they were prepared to take us on this immensely deep journey into the forest to see where and if their wild cousins still existed. And the chapter in the book is called The Dream Wanderers of Borneo, because these people, the Punan Dayaks, believe they have two souls. They believe they have the initial spark of life that carries us through this world, and the dream wanderer in us, which can be awakened and trained to awake in trance and conscious dreaming. and in altered states. And it is this dream wanderer that not only guides them when they're lost in the forest, but also guides them at the crossroads of their inner lives. I don't know whether to do this or to do that. They go into a state of trance, they dream about it for a few days, and then they know what to do. So that's why it's called the Dream Wanderers of Borneo. And when we finally found them, we were in pretty rough shape. We were hungry, we'd been bitten to bits, and they, instead of running away from us or indeed attacking us, they embraced us, they took us into their community, they nursed us back to health. They even gave us the tattoo of their god of love. And this was long before it was trendy to have tattoos, too, I might imagine, as you can probably imagine. In fact, I was living in California, between California and Indonesia at the time. I went back to California and roller skated down the Venice boardwalk in Los Angeles with my shirt off, proudly displaying my tattoo on my chest. And all the girls went, ugh, how could you do that to your body? Little did I know that in another 20 years, everybody would be covered from head to foot in tattoos. But this was a very special thing for us. And I think perhaps they made the deepest impression on me because before we had found the nomadic Punans themselves, we were with these semi-acculturated Punans who were leading us in. We ran out of all our food. We were getting flooded by immense rains. You'd have to climb up trees on occasions in order to be not to be swept away. And of course, every other creature was climbing up trees at the same time as well. Ants, this, that, and the other. The difficulty by now was food. We had lived before that terrible rain period on poison blow-darted gibbons brought down by our Punan companions, valuable creatures. And now that was no longer possible. And instead of abandoning us and just getting enough food to feed themselves, they considered us part of their family and kept us alive. So the Punan Dayaks probably made the deepest impression on me.
Yeah, that's incredible. And like you said, you are out amongst some of this wildlife that some of it hadn't even probably been discovered with some of this wildlife and that you'd encountered and probably didn't know what the effects were of some of, these creatures in your adventures, let alone the cannibals and the other humans that were out there. I'm sure that there was so much that I know is in the book. And your experience with these traditional shamans, rituals, or invisible worlds as such, how did they affect the beliefs about human consciousness or the unknown for you that people are always intrigued about more now? What is it that we don't know that we don't know?
I began being already interested and already awakened to these subtle faculties in us that the Western left-brained world only began believing in 40 or 50 years ago. It was all considered mumbo jumbo, nonsense, superstition. But of course, psychoanthropology was particularly focusing on those tribal peoples who had these subtle abilities. And we certainly experienced them in Bali when we were living here in the early 70s. All sorts of wonderful stuff was going on around us that the West, for instance, there was a fellow who would ban ant infestations. He was called Mr. Bygone, Guru Bygone, because Bygone is one of the sort of animal sprays, anti-mosquito sprays. And if you had a bad infestation of ants, you would ask him over. And he would look at these and he would say, oh, don't bother about these ones. They'll be out of here tomorrow. Or these ones are bad. They're setting up house. They're in competition to you. I'd better get rid of these. And he would do a ritual, bells, gongs, chanting, incense. And lo and behold, we used him twice, and he worked on both occasions. Friends of ours in the neighborhood used him many more times. He worked. If he hadn't been effective, nobody would have hired him and paid him, which they did. So that was one thing. And then there were definite other states of altered consciousness where people could tell. Remember, when we first came and lived in Bali, there were no telephones, there were no addresses, there was no street signs of any description whatsoever. And it was quite a business to meet your friends in other part of the island. And it was certainly quite a business to go from Ubud down to the airport to meet somebody coming in. And our people up there in the village could go into a state of trance and say, no, we don't think so and so is arriving at the airport, so we're not going to go down and meet them. And 9 times out of 10, they were correct. So there are numerous extraordinary examples of peoples who have developed these sensitivities that in the West we considered to be superstition, but are now realizing are very much part of our ancient history and are still there lurking within us, every one of us, even in the West, unless we suppress it too much.
Yeah, I love it. And you were very aware of this well before, like you said, it became trendy or before it really became something that it was always been there, but it's now people are more interested, and that's what I love. It's you're the real
Absolutely.
pioneer. It just took a few of us a little bit longer to catch on, which is great.
I'm ahead of my time all the time. It's a real inconvenience. And by the way, Susan, while I'm on this, I suppose the person in that field who made the greatest impression is somebody who we refer to as Dynamo Jack. If anybody Googles, I mean, we've had millions of hits on this man. It's a very famous piece of footage of a fellow who we filmed, who we did not believe for a start, who has practiced a traditional form of Chinese medicine, if you like, called Qigong, and it can be used as a martial art or as a healing art. He used it as a healing art, and he claims to have developed this ability. Well, I experienced it on many occasions, and we have it on film, and there's a piece about it in the book. Ring of Fire, where he can project through his hands an energy, chi energy, which he can manipulate not only to heal people, that is, by manipulating their acupressure zones, but for lighting fires, drawing things into his hand, all that stuff that we still don't really believe in. The first, he said we couldn't film him because he says the first thing the Western mind will ask itself is, how does he do the trick? And if I explain, he says, that anybody could learn this if they put anything like the time and energy into it that we put into building aeroplanes and this, that, and the other. We too could do it. Then they would think that he was a liar as well as a trickster. So best not to it, best to keep out of it and to just carry on healing his people. But anyway, to make again a long story short, the full story is in the book. He eventually allowed us to film him a bit, and it made an incredible impression all over the world. And
Yeah.
it's still up.
Yeah, and I know that there's an image in the book where there's
Yeah.
some beautiful images in the book that people can see that show when I think it's not this one, but that can show where different areas where he lit on fire with no matches, the
Yeah.
newspaper, I think it was of yours. So I know that we want to there's so much that we could talk about. You're a wealth of knowledge. You do so much. Anthropologist, author, explorer, photographer, storyteller, filmmaker. What inspires you most today, and what is next in the life of Lawrence Blair? And also, before you answer that, I want to let people know that what's so extraordinary is we do have this book for all the Bali visitors and coming into the Peri Plus bookstores throughout Indonesia as well as online throughout the world. So people will be able to get the link below to be able to go and access Lawrence's website, to go and purchase the book no matter where you are in the world. An amazing read. So that will be below. But just in ending this for everyone, again, what inspires you today and what is next for Lawrence Blair?
Well, what inspires me today is what has always inspired me from the beginning, which is the wonder of life and how rigid we are about how we perceive it still. So I'm always into opening up this sense of awe. We seem to think it's the end of history and we know everything basically, but we don't. We're on the beginning of a whole new way of seeing the world. I'm now doing a film which we hope to begin shooting at the end of the year, which is about consciousness in nature, which is the rather revolutionary thought, though it is found in the modern sciences very much increasing today, that everything is actually alive with an extraordinary sort of consciousness. We're not the only conscious creatures. It was thought that we differed from the animals at least four initial ways. We thought that we were the only tool users. We thought we were the only people who used aesthetics and beauty in the mating game. Not at all. We thought that we were the only people who mourned our dead. No, many animals do that too. And we thought we were the only ones who used language. No. this whole new world they're discovering of the subtlety and complexity of interspecies, not just inside one species, but interspecies language. For instance, the work with the help of AI that's being discovered in what is the language of the whales. They speak in little codas. And now, for the first time, we can penetrate that complexity. So my interest is on two fronts, and it continues to be on two fronts. One is the intelligence of the heart, and the other of the mind in the new sciences of discovering who and what we are in this amazing point in time.
Well, thank you so much. We could talk for hours. You are such an interesting human being that has so much knowledge to share. And I encourage everyone, get in, buy this book. Like I said, the links and all the details will be below. It's an amazing read that will keep you on the edge of your seat. And of course, open our minds to the wonders of the world. So thank you so much, Lawrence.
Thank you, Susan.
And
Take
we can't wait to share your book with the world.
Good. Thank you. Cheers.